Hey guys, Chris here and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to tell you how I went from a MacBook to the iPad and back again in the past year and what I've learned along the way. Please hit the like button down below to help me out and let's get started. Okay, first up, let me give you some context. I'm a student in economics and business administration and I bought my first iPad about 2 years ago to go paperless. It was an iPad Air 3 and I totally loved it. It worked wonders in terms of decluttering, especially as a student. Going from stacks of unorganized paper in school to just one tiny device the size of a notepad was mind-blowing to me. Over time, I even started to love it so much that I thought about replacing my MacBook and my iPad with just one device, an iPad Pro, that could then fulfill all my personal computing needs. Those were and still are some basic, lame office work, mail, spreadsheets, note-taking, and light video editing. And even though that worked great with the bigger 12.9-inch iPad Pro and Magic Keyboard, I hit some major bumps along the way that made me go back to Macs. So what were they? Well, given my use case, you might probably think they would have to do something with video editing. But actually, that's not the case. Video editing, for what I need, some basic video edits for YouTube, adding together different iPhone clips and editing out mistakes works great in LumaFusion. In fact, I would even say it's a bit easier to get started with compared to Final Cut Pro, as it's not that complicated. The only thing missing there is the automatic sync function for audio and video that Final Cut has, but that's not that big of a deal if you're not a professional. Instead, the issues were way worse. First up, the file management system. I know, this is the one everyone talks about, but hear me out. I'm not complaining about the design of the app. I don't need it to look like Finder on the Mac, and I don't even need it to have the same functionality. In fact, if it were up to me, they could keep the whole app as it is, as long as they just add a progress bar. It is so frustrating to never know whether or not your files are actually copying or not. Sometimes they show up a few minutes later, sometimes they show up as duplicates, or they just don't show up at all. For example, I have lost a few months of university work when trying to copy it from an iPad onto an SSD just because the folder showed up on the SSD, but just later I found out that it was actually empty. Since there was no progress bar, I was not able to see when the progress was actually finished. And even though I could have checked, I think that's something every basic computer has to be able to do. If a computer costs more than $1,000, it has to be able to copy files reliably. But that wasn't the only issue I've experienced. The whole iPad experience just wasn't enough laptop-like for me at the times where I really needed it to be. It starts with the File Explorer, goes on with stuff like the not useful at all slide over multitasking for more than 2 apps, and probably ends somewhere on a weirdly scaled website that looks like a web designer's cat walking across the keyboard a few times and is sometimes less usable than the actual iPhone version. There are, at least for me, still instances where I would wish for the maybe boring but still easier, way more convenient experience of a traditional laptop. But that is not even what brought me back to the Mac. In fact, I would be willing to put up with all of that if it weren't for one other big issue. Okay, wait a minute. At this point, I should probably first tell you why I love the iPad so much to put up with all that stuff in the first place. After all the talk about the issues that came up, you might ask the question, why even put up with them in the first place? Why go through all this to try to make a device or your computer that is clearly not suited for it? Well, it's not that easy. There are still so many things I love about the iPad, even though there are the drawbacks I've talked about. And I get that not everyone is going to be able to relate to those, but if you're watching this video thinking about replacing your laptop with an iPad, I think you'll be able to relate to at least one of them. For me, one of the main advantages of the iPad is the versatility. With a MacBook, I always felt like I needed to have an iPad to be able to take handwritten notes digitally, which was very important for me in the first semesters. With the iPad and a keyboard case, you can get all of that in just one device. Attach it to a keyboard and it becomes almost like a laptop, but detach it and a few seconds later, with a pencil, it can become your digital notepad. I just love that aspect of the iPad. I like to own the least things possible and try to get the most out of the things I own. And with the iPad doing so many things at once, it makes it the perfect device for that. Also, I like the one task at a time focused approach of iPadOS. Even though that can create issues as a student when referencing multiple sources or copying stuff between documents, I think there's still a certain appeal to it. You will never ever fall into the trap of having too many windows open at once and not being able to focus. Although I wish I had a choice sometimes, I think it's very cool to never have to worry about closing apps or windows to stay focused. To sum this part up, I think the iPad just feels a bit better in day-to-day use. The touchscreen, the design of the device, it just feels a bit like future. Having a thin and ultra-light, bright and crazy good looking screen in your hand that can be or do everything you want it to. And all that with just the touch of your fingertips. That just seems like everything we have ever dreamed about a few years ago. Sadly though, that dream proves to be a bit unrealistic or unpractical right now. Okay, now the fun part. What has actually ruined the iPad for me? Well, to put it simply, the exact versatility I love about it so much was the thing that ruined it for me in the end. Let me explain. I loved the iPad so much because it was a thin sheet of glass I could do all of my work on. Since I loved it so much, I bought the 12.9-inch version with a keyboard to replace my laptop. That made it a good laptop replacement, but at the same time it also felt like a laptop. I could take it off, but the big iPad, unlike the smaller versions, just felt too big and cumbersome to hold in the hands for a long time. And that really annoyed me, since I wanted to replace my laptop with an iPad, not turn my iPad into a laptop. After realizing that, a couple months later, I sold my big iPad and replaced it with the 11-inch version. The power of that little machine is absolutely mind-boggling. It's just a little too small to use as an only computer for me. Having two apps open at the same time in split view makes both kind of too small to really use, and video editing is also not really fun on the smaller screen. But the worst experience was trying to put together a group essay out of 2 or 3 single documents. It was just way too unwieldy and cumbersome on the small screen. So I realized no matter what I did, I always had to compromise somewhere. Either I used the smaller iPad, which is great at all the things I love to do on the iPad, but not as great as a laptop, or I used the bigger one, turn it into a laptop, but compromising on all the things that made me love the iPad so much in the first place. Alright, so where did that leave me? Well, I decided to buy a MacBook again. Even though I love the iPad, it's just so much more effective for so many use cases. If I want to bring the iPad close to that, I get a less functional laptop that doesn't work great as an iPad anymore. But if I want to use a smaller, more traditionally sized iPad, I just have to compromise on the laptop tasks too heavily. So even though I wanted it to work out so badly, I switched back to a MacBook. Conveniently, I decided on that just a few weeks before the M1 Macs were announced, which made it even more compelling. Yes, it is not as versatile, but it does what it does extremely well. And what it does is just more of what I needed to do right now than what the iPad does. That doesn't mean I would not advise you to replace your laptop with an iPad. It heavily depends on your use case, whether or not you're a student, and even on your specific subject. But just try to take off the rose-colored iPad glasses, try to view it in a more pragmatic way and see which one is best for your use case. I still hope that Apple continues to push the iPad in the direction they have pushed it in over the past couple of years to make it more accessible as a computer replacement for more people. And as soon as there are major changes, I will be the first one to try it out again. But right now, it is not there yet for me. All in all, I don't love my MacBook nearly as much as I loved my iPad. It is much more boring, way less futuristic, and doesn't feel as refreshing or convenient to use, for lack of a better term. But that's just not what matters. Both are tools that help me to get things done. And right now, the MacBook, at least for what I have to get done, is just way more effective. Alright, I hope I could help you decide. If you liked the video, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more videos like this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.